Vamos a ver una entrevista que nos dará la inspiración, la superación para ver los ciertos problemas y superarlos. En 1986 a Pierre Brosnan le ofrecieron ser James Bond. El contrato caducaba a los 60 días y tuvo algún problema y ya no pudo hacerlo. Entonces pillaron a Timothy Dalton, que hizo 2 películas. Eso le provocó como una especie de depresión, ya que eso le habría solucionado la vida. Pero al final fue constante y 11 años después le volvieron a ofrecer ser James Bond y lo fue durante 4 películas, lo cual le hizo que le solucionara la vida. Tenía muchas deudas en aquella época y al final consiguió pagarlas todas. Vamos a ver la entrevista, que la verdad es que es realmente brutal. Él lo cuenta calmadamente, pero todo lo que cuenta la verdad es que es una fuente de inspiración y de conocimiento. Pues nada, vamos a verla.
Bond has made a big difference, yes, absolutely. Prior to Bond, I was thinking of selling the house. I have a lovely house in Malibu, it's 6 acres. That's a big old nut, to pay for. And I thought I'll cut my losses, and I'll really just concentrate on a film career. And I'd been doing Mrs. Doubtfire, I'd done Love Affair, so I was slowly beginning to kind of build up a career in the movies. Because I came to this country, 15, 16 years ago, thinking I was going to work with Martin Scorsese, and I got a TV series, and it was Remington Steele, and it was wonderful. And it was a great learning process, but the 4th season, it got cancelled. They drew the line across it, no more. Bond came around. I was touted for Bond, and what had happened was there was a 60-day clause in my contract to NBC, actually to MTM, and then to NBC. And within those 60 days, Cubby Broccoli, the late Cubby Broccoli, and my agents set up the negotiations for me to do Bond. We'd done the wardrobe fittings, we'd taken the photographs, all of this was done down at Pinewood, and the clock was ticking, 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 and we were assured that I was going to get out of Remington Steele. And then NBC said, we'd like the option of 22. Well, no, Cubby said, look, you can have him for 6 episodes, but no more than 6, then he's mine. And the clock ticked, 57, 58, 59, 60. They said, NBC said, we want the option of 22. Cubby said no, and that was it.
You must have been seriously cheesed off, weren't you?
I was pretty gutted by the thing, because you felt so manipulated, and it was played out in the media. And Bond, there's always such a ballyhoo about the next James Bond, and quite right too, because it's tradition, it's an institution, it is what it is. So yes, I felt pretty annoyed. It actually was a delayed reaction. Yeah. About 6 months later, I was driving down PCH, and I was thinking of the possibilities that could have been, might have been, and I was hearing about Tim doing it, and so just.
Didn't you hate Timothy Dalton at that time?
No, it was nothing to do with Tim. It wasn't personal. I mean, it was business, purely business, and you learn that pretty quickly in this town, and greed.
And greed, yeah.
It was greed from NBC, because they wanted everything. They thought they were going to have, a TV star and then an international film star. So you cut your losses and you move on.
But did you think it's worked out for the best that you didn't get it then? Because it's best part of 10 years later when you finally played the part.
I think back there in '86, it was quite overwhelming. I think secretly there was a relief that I didn't get it, and yet the world knew that I was the man that they wanted, and within that came a kind of its own curse, because wherever I went in the world, people would say, oh, you were the guy that was going to be and should have been and could have been and might have been James Bond. In '64, I left Ireland, came to live in London with my mother and my stepfather. It was in Putney, and the first weekend there, we went to the movies. They took me to the movies, and it was Goldfinger. And so as a boy, having been brought up in Southern Ireland, in Navan, County Meath, there was the Lyric and the Palace Cinema, and it was Old Mother Riley and Norman Wisdom, and that's what I was brought up on. So to see this incredible movie, this Technicolor film, and And this beautiful blonde lady, half naked on a bed, was captivating. But the Bond character I didn't relate to. Oddjob was fascinating, you know.
You fancied yourself as Oddjob?
Well, as Oddjob,
hurling
yeah.
bowler hats at
bowler
people.
hats.
Yeah.
Well, no, just as a boy, you know, just the gimmick of the whole thing.
Yeah.
And so that was that weekend, and then the following weekend it was Lawrence of Arabia.
Bond crops up intriguingly in your life because isn't it true that that Cassie had a part in one of the Bond films, and with the money she earned from that, you bought your first house in Putney? Is that right?
Exactly.
So you're obviously
Exactly.
fated to pay Bond sometime or other.
Couldn't escape it.
Couldn't escape it.
Couldn't escape it. We bought the house in Wimbledon, which, you know, my mother and father now live in. And she had just done For Your Eyes Only. And at that point, I had been out of work for a couple of months. I just finished a run in the West End. She got the job. It was wonderful, because she was the breadwinner then. Went off to Corfu, and that was my first encounter with the Broccolis. Cubby at that time was most gracious to Cassie, the children, and I, and Barbara and Cass became good friends, Barbara Broccoli. We joked about my being James Bond, never thinking in a million years that it was ever going to enter into my career. And at that time, I got a job offer for the Manions of America, which was a 6-hour miniseries. They were looking for this guy to play in this miniseries. I got that. And so with the proceeds from both jobs, we bought the house and then decided to go to America.
Which of your predecessors as Bond did you like best?
Connery. Connery, because he was the first man that I saw in 1964. And then, of course, I consequently went to every James Bond movie. So I grew up with Sean's work. And, but I cannot let it go by so readily without saying Roger, because Roger then I saw come into the role as Bond. And I remember all the articles being written then about, you know, well, he's not going to be Connery, he's not going to be this. But Roger made it his own, you know, brilliantly so for 7 films.
And they said the same thing about you when you got into it. You know, is he going to be Connery? Is he going to be as good as Roger? Yeah.
So I mean, I knew going into it that those comparisons were going to be made, and I don't think in '86 when I was offered it, I don't think I would have risen to the task as I did.
Yeah. Well, at least you were compared with Connery and Roger, not with George Lazenby.
That would have been a bad day, really. Poor George. I don't think it was George's fault. I just think he got the short end of the wedge there, really. I think in those days they didn't know what they had in their hands, and it really, you cannot underestimate this role, you know, the role of Bond.
Espero que os haya gustado la entrevista. La verdad es que todo lo que cuenta es de un valor increíble, sobre todo porque él mismo falló y no le echó nunca la culpa a Timothy Dalton. Y luego la vida, a base de constancia, de trabajo, le supo volver donde tenía que estar, a ser James Bond. Y al final le hizo 4 películas. Incluso fue comparado con algunos de los James Bond más grandes de la historia. Espero que hayáis disfrutado de esta entrevista y nos vemos en el siguiente vídeo. Chao, chao.